Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. We are so glad to have you join us with day two of the Human SOS Summit. And we appreciate those that have joined, and we anticipate some more people joining us along the way. And we're looking forward to sharing today about onboarding. And V will take charge of that. But for the moment, I've been asked to talk a bit about human SOS and the leader. And I want to just get everyone to kind of put on your imagination or thinking cap or whichever version that you're accustomed to. And I'm not going to put a lot of text up today. Just want to use some imagery and let you think about it. But human SOS is basically about living our life and in a total way with congruence, as we talked about yesterday, but not just part of our life, but our whole life, and living it at work as well. And that creates some challenges because not everyone is working and doing what is really that their life is about. So a lot of different questions that come up as a result. But in the end, we want that people to be able to work the way they live, because if we don't, how long we are able to work and how productive we are is going to be very limited, and we're going to be facing the problems that we have already been facing. And I like this graphic that I was able to find because it talks about a lot of the different aspects of humanity, and such as collaboration and listening and empowerment and tolerate and diversity, working side by side. So just a lot of the components that we are discussing. And sometimes when we talk about humanity at work and we talk about emotional intelligence and things like that, especially people of my generation, they start cringing inside and they start talking, thinking, oh boy, here we go, group hug. We're going to join hands and sing Kumbaya. And no, it's not all about feel good and those pieces. That's a part of it, sure. But I haven't met anyone that doesn't enjoy being able to feel good about what they do and who they are. So, but it's not the type of picture that gets conjured up when we talk about human sustainable operating system. And so like to talk a little bit about one of our mantras as we have come together in our vision and trying to develop and move forward with human SOS. And the mantra is manage things, lead people. And just currently, unfortunately, we have a lot of people in the work world that are in roles and they focus primarily on managing things. And you'll see on this graphic, that means doing metrics, that means considering performance and to-do lists and tasking and projects. That's all necessary. And it involves people, but there is an element of this that doesn't apply. And when we only focus in on the left side of this principle, we end up with micromanagers. We end up with what is archetypal boss, the bad boss, and so on. So what we have to do is to bring in another favorite term that we use at Perspective Force, and that is balance. And the balance to the managing things is leading people. And that it means taking an approach to people that first and foremost considers them as human beings. we really have to think about how to, and rather than demand and push and challenge and threaten to get people to do things, is how to motivate people and how to inspire them to do what we need them to do. And hopefully, whatever it is that we're getting them to do lines up with what they do and do well. So, leading people. And so we need to just really focus in on how to manage things and lead people. So, you have to consider how to do both. And what I have found, I do training for leadership for a lot of field leaders, and I have trained hundreds of people. And what I find is that quite often that these leaders are really not strong at managing the things or leading the people, and especially not leading people because they're still struggling to manage things. And one of the what I advise them to do is figure out a way to manage things that works for them. We and those of you that know me know that I am not a fan of formulas. In fact, some might say I'm a little bit antagonistic towards them because formulas don't fit people and people don't fit formulas. But what we do have to figure out is how to manage things in a way that we will keep it up, that fits us. For example, and I know Anton can identify with this, people that diet. We watch people diet. It lasts for however long the official diet period is, and then people quit the diet, and they usually end up in a worse place because the diet was such a change and a shock to what they do and who they are. And so it doesn't work, it doesn't sustain. So, with managing things, figure out ways to manage things that work for you. One of the big questions that I always ask among leaders is, what is your way of processing information? And there's a variety of ways, but there are two particular camps that come up. You have some people that will manage things using digital capability, and they really would rather be digital than paper and have trouble filing paper and keeping up with it. Yet you look at their digital world and it's lined up and in order how they can manage it. Others are so uncomfortable in the digital world that they're going to rely primarily on paper and pencil, and that's fine. If you know that about yourself, work accordingly. And if there's something in between, whatever, but figure that out. How can you manage what you need to manage? Because if you don't keep up with those things, your projects are not going to be as successful because you're poor planning and organized. So really work on a system that helps you as a leader, as a manager, whatever the title you prefer, to be able to manage the things you're responsible for. And if you do that well, then it gives you more time to be able to lead people. And one of the reasons that we tend to want to manage people rather than lead them is because it's efficient. And we, as I talked about yesterday, we like to fit them in our nice, neat boxes because we can fit our boxes together in a way that we can keep track of it and so on. But people don't fit boxes well. So what we need to do then is to take the time to lead the people, and that involves several principles. One of them that we talk about all the time, and that is to find out about your people, know your people. If you don't know them, you can't lead them. You cannot set up situations to move them forward. And the second component that we deal with, and we model this in our own worlds, and that is having a vision. If you don't have a vision, you are going to find it difficult to lead people. And that vision not only do you have to have it, but you have to be able to communicate it well and even communicate it in a compelling fashion so that the people that are part of what you're doing are going to buy in. They're going to find passion to follow that vision, to be a part and moving towards that vision. And then the other two components that follow on that is mission and, of course, planning, so that on the left side you can manage things and be free to lead people. And what I find is when people, managers, bosses attempt to manage people, especially current generations, is that they end up spending all their time trying to deal with either motivation, engagement, or conflict among their team. So that in the end, real common is that the management of things gets put off till the last minute. I know a lot of leaders that have to do a report or gather data, and they're at 11 o'clock at night in their own time trying to pull this together and anxious and sweating bullets, and their stress level is not where it needs to be, especially at 11 o'clock at night. And it's because they've spent so much time dealing with people issues the wrong way. So manage things and lead people is a core component of leaders in the human SOS model, the human SOS principle. And one of the things that I like to really encourage people is to understand that the leadership, the lifestyle leadership that is the key to this is servant leadership. And it's the willingness to be either, in this graphic, you see some people being held up by others, and at some point, that's where the leader will reside. Other points, the leader needs to be willing to be one of the people holding others up and staying in the background. And then in the last, I don't know, maybe year and a half, it really, a principle or an application principle, servant leadership, really hit me right between the eyes. And let me tell you a little bit about that. I used to, and I still share a little bit, people have romantic notions about being their own boss and how amazing that is, and get to do whatever you want and just all this. Well, having run now on my second business, and I have come to face the realities of the business world and being my own boss. And there is definitely some great things about that position, but there are some things that make it not so romantic. And so what I would tell people to give them a balanced perspective on being your own boss, being an entrepreneur, is that I used to tell people that the worst boss that I've ever had was me. And it's true, because I'm hardest on me more so than I am on anyone else. But it started dawning on me that I am missing a part of the very principles that I teach leaders, and that is servant leadership. I would, if I was advising a leader and found out that they were being the worst boss, I would certainly address that and be very concerned and so on. But why not the same for me? And what I began to understand is that I have to develop using servant leadership principles and direct them towards me. So I have really changed the way I approach things, and it forced me to even dig down a little further into what servant leadership is about. And I realized that there are three core characteristics of a servant leader. And those three core characteristics are responsibility, acceptance, and humility. And in order to live as a servant leader and be a servant leader, you've got to have those core characteristics. So I started digging into it a little further. And what does that mean if I'm applying that concept to me? If I'm being a servant leader of me, because I've got to start by being a leader of one. If I can't lead myself, I am not going to effectively lead others. So started looking at responsibility. I had to realize that yes, there were things that occurred in my world, my life, that I couldn't control that affected me negatively. But at some point, I had to say, that happened. I have to acknowledge it, but then I have to say, what am I going to do about it? And take that on, and that includes all of it, the good and the bad and the ugly, to use an old movie reference. So responsibility and owning what's around me, being responsible for it. The second component of these characteristics, or second characteristic, is that of acceptance. And that's a tough one because most of us have not accepted who we are. Part of the reason that we struggle so with confidence is that we don't have confidence in who we are. We haven't said that I've been created and designed well, and that's okay. I'm not perfect. In no way am I perfect. Likely won't be perfect, but I am who I am. And a key mindset for me was to realize that I wasn't a cosmic accident. And so just applying acceptance to me. And by the way, as you learn to accept you, you begin to be able to accept others. If you don't accept you, you're going to struggle trying to accept others. So the third component or characteristic of servant leadership is the component of humility. And one of the things that I have realized is part of humility is in accepting who we are, owning up to our own mistakes. And that involves, first of all, getting forgiveness for how I've blown it. And I know I've blown it over the years, and I continue to blow it because I'm not perfect. So being humble and seeking forgiveness. And for me, and this is my approach, it's not something that's mandated of others, although I suggest that it's a good idea, is seeking forgiveness for me as a person to my Creator, and accepting that and applying that to my life with humility. Well, part of this characteristic of humility is also giving forgiveness to other people. I was reading a post on LinkedIn this morning talking about bitterness. And one of the worst things, and will keep you from being a servant leader, is the whole issue of bitterness. And the best way to not be bitter is to be forgiven and to forgive. And so as we approach with the characteristic of humility, giving and receiving forgiveness is such a key part. And when that includes, again, as I said, I was one of my own worst critics as a boss. I've got to forgive me. It's one thing to accept forgiveness from others. It's another thing for us to apply that forgiveness, to make that a part of us. And so those are the three core characteristics of a servant leader. And first, I apply it to me so that I can then gain confidence to lead me into being excellent at what I do. And then as I can apply this leadership principle, servant leadership principle to me, then I can start also applying it to others, because I have experienced it, for one thing. And once we experience it, it helps us to be able to share with others. I mean, think about it. The best way to model something is to live it. And if we haven't lived it, it makes it hard to model it. So human SOS and the leader, one of the cores starts with servant leadership, and then applying those servant leadership to the people that we are charged with leading. So we come from the idea of what is human SOS, and it is a humanly sustainable operating system. And as a leader, what does it look like? And for a leader, it means that we have to manage things and lead people. And the first step in that process is to uh, develop a lifestyle of servant leadership. And then once we start applying the principles of servant leadership to our own lives, to ourselves, then we are in a place to begin to apply it to others. And so, what does that look like? And this is a real key to how we get to being effective in being a leader in a human SOS environment. So, let's talk a little bit about that and move forward with how do we provide servant leadership for the people around us. First of all, we have to have the foundation of humility. And if you're going to be a servant leader or a leader, because I don't think you can be one or the other, I think you have to be a servant leader to truly lead. You've got to start with realizing that your people that you're working with are in some ways no different than you. And you have to be able to communicate to them the value that they have, because remember, as you've gone through this, you figured out your value, you've accepted your value. Now it's time to accept their value. And it's also time to accept them as different. And so, knowing your people and beginning to build relationship with the people that you're responsible for leading is a key. Most of what we see today, and I know Anton especially has great stats on the idea of engagement and how poorly we are engaged in the workforce currently and how big a struggle it is. And the reason I think is that we're not engaging people is we're spending too much time trying to manage them rather than lead them. And for me, it was an interesting testing ground as I was growing and developing in the principles of leadership. For me, one of those testing grounds was as a school teacher, and trying to understand and apply the principles of leadership with ninth through 12th grade high school students is a bit challenging, because anyone that's ever been exposed to that world knows that the idea of leadership for that group is more like herding cats, which is very much what we're dealing with in the workforce now. So the idea was that having principles coming in and holding to those principles. But one of the things that was very eye opening for me in looking at applying principles of leadership was I had to survey my students. It was part of an accreditation process. I wish I could say I was smart enough to have thought of this on my own, but I was pushed into it because I was trying to develop the best program I could. And one of the requirements is survey your students, get feedback from them. And as a high school teacher, we weren't required, but I decided to do that as going extra mile. So, long story short, one of the questions on this survey was, do you think your teacher cares about you? Now, let me give you a little backdrop. When I approached teaching, I decided that I was going to treat these young people like my own children. And I love my children very dearly. And so that was the way I was approaching them. Well, I got the results back from this survey. And usually you get some interesting results when you do these things. But if something stands out, you go, wow. And 80% of the young people that responded to this survey said, he doesn't care about me. And I thought, whoa. And that was a real eye opener. And by the way, let me give you a little more background on it. At that point, I was being told by the students, Mr. Ward, watch your back. So I wasn't doing much in the way of leading at that point. In some ways, I was kind of hunkered down opening. Thank you, V. To survive this whole adventure. And so I thought, wow, they think I don't care about them. I'm pouring my heart and my soul into them and love them like my children, but they don't think I care. So I had to figure out a way to help them see that care and concern. So ultimately, without giving up the standards and excellence they needed to learn, I, I realized that part of the reason they didn't understand my expression of caring was they hadn't seen my vision. So one of the pieces that helped to make a big difference here was I posted my vision on the wall for my young people. Once they started understanding what I was doing, the care I had, and I had to demonstrate it different ways, but it went from Mr. Ward, watch your back, to Mr. Ward, we've got your back. And it was about applying the principles of leadership and giving them a vision of what it was that I had for them. So, being a servant leader is so many faceted and such a necessary part of the human SOS system. It's very critical. But if you apply these principles, the power of this is an old concept. And we at one point we called it peer pressure. Now we call it role modeling. Um, and even more current is being the change that we want. However you want to put it, is to live the example that others can follow. And it doesn't mean that we're trying to get them to become us. What we're trying to do is model the principles of being human and being a servant and a leader so that they can apply those for themselves in where they live. So, human SOS, as a leader, the key is managing things and leading people and learning how to be an effective manager and an effective leader to those that we are in charge of. And that's why we are so passionate about working together as a team to help bring concepts and principles to anyone, individually or organizations, because we've all seen the power of this human SOS. And so we really invite you to come along, be a part of this movement, whether you engage us or not. Help make this movement bring change. Help us to avoid the what is the term where we use up our resources and the mistakes we've made in with our environment. Let's help avoid that. Let's not take 20 or 30 years to make those adjustments and overcome that in the area of our human workforce and how to move that forward and make it truly sustainable. And by the way, business owners, anyone that sees this is not just a giveaway. I can assure you that as these principles are put in place, you will see that your people produce so much more and they become an evangelist for what they do for your company. And as we talked about yesterday, they also become your built in recruiter. Done right, who knows? It may be that your recruiting budget is reduced remarkably because your people are engaged and a part and fulfilled in your human SOS in such a way that they're looking for their friends to come join and be a part as well. So it's certainly valuable. It's not just about warm fuzzies and group hugs. It's very practical, a lot of good application, and it's very effective in overcoming the challenges that we are currently facing. So, really encourage you to look at human SOS, learn from this summit, and then talk to us because we're just giving you, in the limited time we have, we're giving you good information and even application, but there's a lot more to it, and we'd love to work with any organization to help bring human SOS to your company. So that's all I've got.
Kev, I just want to throw this out, for leaders, future leaders, and anybody that'll watch this in the future. It is leaders' responsibility to create this movement. It is leaders' responsibility. I've mentioned the words to be the people's champion. We know that leadership is not a right. It's a responsibility. It's a
Yeah.
privilege, right? And we need to treat things that way. And an analogy that I want to share as I was listening to you, it's for the first time it came to me. I don't know if you guys are familiar with I'm sure you are, with Disney movie, The Beauty and the Beast, right? You guys know how the beast has that flower that he protects, right? And when that flower loses all of its petals, the beast forever will stay as the beast. But I look at that flower as an employee, right? As a team member. Leaders need to do everything they can to protect that flower, to put it in the right environment, the right temperature, to put the shield over it to prevent it from being impacted by things from outside environments. But the other thing is leaders shouldn't be taking that flower out and waving it around aimlessly, expanding energy of that flower, expanding use of that flower that's misused. That's the big thing that I see a lot of leaders do is create a lot of inefficiencies for their people that are utilizing the resources from the human beings in ways that shouldn't be utilized. And people already are so taxed with everyday life, with everything that's going on, that it's become even more important than ever before for leaders to manage efficiencies of how those human resources are being used. You cannot just go, okay, we're going to run 100 miles per hour this direction, and then because it doesn't work, just change direction and be fine. Human beings are making that journey. Human beings have to make those adjustments, and we need to protect them like that beast protects that flower.
Yes. Give give all the credit, take all the blame as a leader.
Yep. And if
All
you don't
right.
like that, it's not for you. That's just the cold reality. I've been harsh with some leaders, and I was like, if you don't like that, and if you don't like that, your job only exists because of these people, and you don't get that, you shouldn't be a leader. Bottom line. And then the leadership's not for everybody, and I believe that.
That is true. In fact, just again, I won't get too far into this and get started on it, but the reality is leadership is not for most. That doesn't mean that the rest are not as good. It just means that we need excellent people to do what needs to be done on a daily basis. And that is honorable, that is desirable. And a part of what a leader does is celebrate those people in all of those roles at every level. And so, yeah, definitely.